Hello and welcome! We're still on a break from Magnus Protocol right now, and so I wanted to do another little Magnus video, not quite as big as the previous one that I did. That one wound up being a lot longer than I intended it to be, but it was a fun one. And so I kind of want to do a follow-up on that. And so last time we talked about what the entities are. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about what avatars are and why someone might choose to be an avatar of each of the different entities. I know that I covered this a little bit in a few of the entities in my previous video, but I didn't bring it up at all with some of them because I just forgot, I guess. I really should have caught that in recording, but, you know, or editing. It's fine. We're going to cover it here. And, of course, that means there will be complete spoilers for the Magnus Archives. Not so much for Magnus Protocol yet. We're still only 10 episodes in. We're only the start of the way in. You know, we haven't gotten far enough in to be able to start saying, well, this person's for sure an avatar. But I'm pretty sure we've already met an avatar of the dark, maybe. Anyway, we'll get into it. So, first off, before we get into what benefits an avatar would get from each entity, we should probably talk about what an avatar is in the Magnus Archives and most likely in the Magnus Protocol as well. An avatar is somebody that, through a choice of their own, has become a servant, is maybe the best way to put it, of the fears of the entities, of an individual entity. They have decided, we're told specifically that they have to make a choice as part of, I believe it's the season 4 Q&A, that they had to make an active choice, I believe is the exact wording. They have to make a choice, and from there, they die. Whether that death is literal or metaphorical, metaphysical, hard to say. It depends on the fear, but they stop being the person they were, and they become someone else. Does this mean that they have to make an active choice of like, hey, I'm going to serve this all-powerful creature that exists? Not necessarily. I would assume you could become an avatar of the lonely if you just wanted to be left alone enough, right? But that would still be your choice to work for just the lonely. All you want is to be alone with nothing else, right? I believe that through this is where they get the abilities. Once they have that death, that moment of I am not who I was, they can suddenly do other things. But there is a catch, of course. Not only do they serve an evil, as it were, in many ways, but they also then have to feed. And this is not just like, hey, a vampire has to feed to stay alive, though it is similar to that in many ways. They have to feed through something very specific to the entity or the fear that they serve. So, for instance, again, full spoilers for Magnus Archives, we see John feed because he is taking statements, right? We see Daisy feed because she needs to hunt. Or we see her going through withdrawals from feeding, as it were. Theoretically, though, somebody that serves the lonely, they feed by just being alone, right? And I say theoretically only because we get to see it with Martin, but the world's in a very different state then, but I assume it would have worked the same way before. I think Martin even states that, you know, he needs to do this for a minute. He just needs to be away. And so, theoretically, somebody that works for the lonely just needs to be left alone for a little while. Somebody that works for the dark just needs to turn off the lights for a little while, you know. They could still feed that way. But it also seems like even within being an avatar for one entity, I keep gesturing to the sky like the entities are above me in a list and I can point them out. I can't help that. I really like to sort things in my head. Anyway, theoretically, even within one entity's domain, there would still be multiple ways to feed, because we see the man that is serving the eye with the security cameras that is watching constantly. Surely that's him feeding, right? Also, could it be somebody that serves the eye, a stalker, for instance? Could they feed just by stalking? Or would that be the hunt? Or would that be the crossover between the two? It's hard to say, but theoretically, there's a lot of options even within it. So anyway, I've rambled on long enough. I want to talk about each of the fears, and we're going to do them in the order that we've already covered them in the last episode. That way it'll make it easy. We'll be doing the exact same order, and we'll go down through why someone might want to serve one of the fears, and also what benefits they might gain from it. For instance, I talked about some of these in the last episode, but did not cover all of them, which was a mistake. I should have went ahead and covered them all here, or there, but now it means I get to cover them all here. So, benefits and mistakes, they go hand in hand, some say. They're probably wrong. Let's get started with the corruption. Now, the corruption's pretty easy. We know an avatar from the corruption very early on, and that is Jane Prentice. The corruption has quite a few different things that it could offer, right? There's a couple of different people that serve the corruption over the course of the Magnus archives. So this one is probably one of the grossest ones, which will make it also fun to get out of the way first. Why would someone serve the corruption? Well, maybe they don't like to be alone. And we see that specifically with the man at the bar that, he's not alone anymore because he's full of bugs. Maybe they have a hard time not having a lot of family around them at any time. Or maybe they want to see the world rot. Maybe they've been dealt a bad hand in life and they just want to see everybody suffer around them. That could also be slaughter, I guess, but if it's a slow rot, that would be the corruption. I could easily see like a college student that is crumbling under the weight of student loans. And like, I want everybody else to have to feel how I'm feeling right now. Though, could also be the buried, depending, right, in that. But that very much feels like somebody that would turn to the corruption and turn to that desire to see others hurt in the way that they have hurt, right? But again, I think the easiest one to go to is the family aspect of it. Maybe you're just somebody that really likes bugs, right? But there's a couple of reasons I could see somebody turn into the corruption. This one's not for me. This one wouldn't really be tempting for me at all. And I like insects in a lot of ways, but I could very easily see someone fall to the corruption, as it were. What benefits do they get from it? Well, Jane Prentice seems to have control of worms in some way. I'll put it this way, like John Amherst with the ants, right? Or what is it, Timothy Hodge with the ants? Somebody's going to correct me. It's Jordan, right? Jordan Kennedy with the ants. I'm going to get corrected in the comments for sure. But like Jordan, I believe, with the ants, there's a lot of power in that, The ability to summon ants at your will and send them to do things for you. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. That's a power that would be handy to have. The ability to go, hey, that house is in my way. Termites, go. That would be reasonable. Or the ability to rot something down that's, an eyesore in your lawn or in your community. There are definitely abilities that could be useful from the corruption. Though, again, this one doesn't tempt me at all, really. Much as I like the idea of commanding ants, it's also kind of terrifying. And where I live, fire ants are a huge issue. So I don't really want this one. But, hey, if you're in the comments and you're like, hey, the corruption, it's speaking to me a little bit, just let me know in the comment section down below. So next up on our list is the end. And this one, if we talk about why it might appeal to people, could get a little dark. So I'm going to give you another reminder that you can jump to the next timestamp down below if you don't want to be a part of this discussion, because the trigger warning for this will be unaliving. Just consider that if you don't want to hear people talk about that. Yeah, that one's pretty clear, right? The appeal of this one is you don't want to deal with it all anymore, I guess. It's not the answer. Please, if you ever feel this way, reach out to somebody and get help. I've been there. I've tried it. Wasn't worth it. No matter how much it felt like it was at the time. So we'll just move past that, right? Because we got that pretty clear. This one could be anybody with a terminal illness. This one could be anybody that's crushed in a day job and can't stand it anymore, right? What abilities could they get from it? Well, the ability to kill people, I guess. The ability to be trapped as a mummy. Ability to play a lot of dice with people. This one, like Oliver Banks, really seems to love his job, but man, his job is just terrible. I guess if you've always wanted to be the Grim Reaper, or if you watch a lot of Bleach, this one might be for you. No, thank you. I guess the last big appeal would be like by serving death, you don't have to face it. I guess there is that aspect of it before I just move on, because it took me back to an uncomfortable place. Yeah, there absolutely is that aspect of it, right? There's power in I will do this so that I don't have to face it. It's the Drukhari from Warhammer 40k thing of I don't want to have to face my end, so I will make others face theirs until that time where I no longer have a choice. It's not great, but it is. I mean, Oliver, again, sterling example. Who knows how many people that guy got killed. Let's move on. This has made me rethink this whole video. Let's get into the hunt. The hunt's kind of a fun one, right? It's obviously still horrifying in many ways, but why would you want to serve the hunt? Well, maybe you like to hunt things. Maybe a loved one was hurt by a wild animal or a vampire, and it's your responsibility now to make sure that doesn't happen to anybody else again, right? That's what we see throughout the series with like Trevor and with Julia Montauk and Alice, Daisy, Connor, and Basira, right? Basira also. If I will not apologize for using entire names almost every time I bring somebody up. My brain, that's how it works. It stores them as the name, right? That's how it works. I will not apologize. But I think in many ways that the hunt is kind of a reasonable one to understand why somebody would do it, except for those people that just like to hurt things, in which case that one is far less reasonable for me. But the idea of like, hey, I saw this terrible thing or I lost somebody to this terrible thing, I'm going to make sure it doesn't happen again, that's reasonable to me. Other reasons somebody might serve the hunt is that they are on a quest and they get too gung-ho about it, right? We see that in the people that were looking for El Dorado that have fallen into the hunt, right? There's a ton of little things like that, of even sometimes when I'm looking for my keys and start getting aggravated because I'm having to look for my keys, the hunt could be calling. That's all I'm saying. What is the benefit of serving the hunt? Well, it seems like you get nearly infinite stamina to be able to chase after something. It does have a limit, but it's very, very large, right? When Daisy has given in to the hunt in season 5, she is booking. She is blitzing through domains after the people she's after, and it takes them a while to catch up to her because she is not slowing down. It seems like, and especially like with Trevor too, we get to see that old man puts up a fight, and also he gets to keep going even with his body in tatters from the cancer because the hunt is keeping him going, right? So it really seems like it gives some pretty potent benefits. I can understand why somebody might say, hey, that's the life for me right there. And there is a little part of me that's like, hey, that could be, the hunt for El Dorado. You should go do that for a while and you don't hurt anybody. But eventually you're going to wind up finding people and attacking them and killing them. And, the fears are still not nice. Let's not forget. The fears are still not nice. So next up, we have the dark. Why would you want to serve the dark? Well, this one I think is actually like pretty simple. In a lot of ways, people look at the dark as something to be afraid of, right? But the dark is also in some ways a blanket. It is a complete pressure, but also, hey, I don't know what's around me, which means I don't have to worry about what's around me. it's the inverse of that fear response, right? The normal fear response of, I don't know what's around me, anything could be out there. I don't know what's around me, everything's okay. Why would somebody feel that way? Well, somebody that lives in a major city that is constantly surrounded by bright lights and never feels like they have a moment of peace, where there's always people around them and there's always noise, they might appreciate just being alone in the dark for a little while. And yes, does that get into a little bit of the lonely? Sure, but the dark has that, and we hear it, right, in some of the stuff that we get from Maxwell Rayner of, what is the name of the church? It has completely left my mind. The church that serves the dark, of, there's peace to be had when there's no light. There's not warmth, as it were, but a warmth of a personal warmth of nothing is around that will bother me. I'm finally able to be at peace. And I think that is absolutely why some might serve the dark, right? The hustle and bustle of daily life has overwhelmed them, and the dark is a reprieve from that, as it were. What abilities would it give you? Well, I mean, the ability to blink out all the lights around you is kind of cool, right? It's like invisibility in a lot of ways. Without light, it's a lot harder to be seen. Without light, it's a lot harder for people to find you. It's kind of useful in some regards. Also, let's not forget, they made a miniature black sun that could absorb all light around it, like a black hole. That's kind of sick, right? I'm not saying that I would want to be, an avatar of the dark or anything. I'm just saying that's pretty nifty. That's kind of cool. Next up is the Desolation. And this one, yet again, I think some people might trip up on. It took me a little bit of thinking to be able to figure out the perspective I wanted to take with this one as to why somebody would serve the Desolation. And then it kind of just clicked of well, of course, if you, again, kind of like the corruption, if you've lost everything, why do they get to have stuff? Why did the rest of society get to just keep going on as they're going while you're suffering? That's the Desolation, right? I think we see that very well in Jude Perry of hey, look, she's lost stuff. She doesn't care what she takes. She doesn't care who's hurt. She doesn't care what happens. Just fire, right? What can you gain from the Desolation? Some pretty cool stuff, like the ability to use fire and heat, the ability to burn things. I'm a little bit of a fire bug. I like to, watch a fire as it's burning. And if I could just go, why wouldn't I? Why wouldn't I? No, I think that this one makes a lot of sense to me of just, why would somebody serve it? Because they have fire. But fireballs aside, there is also the aspect of, warmth and family that seems to come from it, as the followers, at least that we saw of the Desolation in Magnus Archives, all seem to be, for the most part, pretty protective of each other. So, there is also that fire burns and brings everything back to zero, and because it consumes all, there is no thing to be held against each other, I guess. I don't know. Jude Perry definitely still has some grievances with people, so maybe I'm just throwing that out there from nowhere, but it feels to me like there is also that aspect of it made me feel something I couldn't feel anywhere else. But that's the Desolation. Next up is the Lonely, and I don't think this one is one that too many people would struggle understanding why someone would choose to serve the Lonely. The Lonely is all about isolation. It's all about being alone, obviously, and not needing anybody else. It's about that desire to get away from everyone and from the noise and from everything else. And so in that way, it seems like it's probably the easiest one for most people to fall into when it comes to just the sheer isolation of it, right? Everybody to a point needs to be alone sometimes, even if that's just, hey, I want to be alone so I can go to the bathroom. There's that core in us of that, and I think it's not too difficult to see where that would advance for a lot of people. But what could the Lonely give you? Well, again, invisibility. We talked about that a little bit with the dark of it's like invisibility, but not quite. This is actual invisibility. The ability to just vanish. The popular basketball series, Kuroko no Basket, one of the big things there with each of the main characters has a superpower is that the main guy's power is that he can vanish. He's got so little presence that people forget he's there. It's kind of like that, right? Of you just effectively vanish, and because of that, you kind of have free reign. You can just leave. Nobody will even know. That may not seem like quite as good power as being able to set things on fire or, you know, developing black holes, but it really is the quintessential useful power of there's not a situation where invisibility is not going to be handy. And so I could definitely see why people would be geared more towards it. Now, of course, we have the entire Lucas family that seems to serve the lonely, and they do pretty well with it. They're somehow still a family, even though they'll spend great expanses of time away from each other and not talk to each other and have no contact whatsoever. It seems to work for them. So I definitely think there are different ways that it could be spun, but the isolation of the lonely, it kind of works, right? I can easily see why people both fall for it and why they continue to serve it, right? Invisibility is pretty good power. On the list of the ones we've covered so far, I think I would take it before I would take the ability to command ants. Ants are still very cool. Do not misunderstand me. I just think invisibility is more useful. Next up is the Vast. And the Vast is a really fun one, because why would someone choose to serve the Vast? Maybe they like being small in the concept of reality. Maybe they like being just a little part of a much grander design, or maybe they just like being able to fly. That one's pretty high up there for me. I am not gonna even lie to you. The ability to fly without a plane is sick, and the fact that my crew can just and do it to other people too, like, that's pretty great power. That's a pretty great power. But also, like, maybe you're somebody that adores space and you want to go explore space, or you're somebody that really is interested in the sky or the ocean, the depths of the ocean, the vastness of the sky, how high a mountain goes, and you love climbing mountains. The Vast it's right there, right? It would be very easy for somebody to fall into it, I think. And then the abilities that it gives, the benefits, the ability to go pretty much wherever you want and explore pretty much whatever you want. It's understandable why people follow the Vast. And in my mind, it's number one on the list for me of, like, yeah, that's the power that I would take. If I was going to fall to any of them, it would be the Vast, I think. I'm not going to, but if I was, it would be the Vast. I feel kind of bad for the Vast because it's my favorite, and there's not really much more that I have to say about it here. It's not my favorite of the fears. It's my favorite of the Avatar powers. I'm explaining this really poorly, but I do think there is a lot to be had in, instead of like a hunt for something specific, just the sheer weight of exploration. The universe is so incredibly huge, and there's so much to see, and the Vast represents that to me. And I'm sure for each one of these, there's 1,000 other ways you could have looked at it, a bunch of different other ways that somebody could have wound up becoming avatar of them. But the Vast for me is the one that makes the most sense of, you know, hey, I can just go there. The sky falls forever before me, and yet I fall with it. Next up is the Buried. And we see with the Buried people like Hezekiah Wakely, I believe is his last name, that cut the cords on the coffins, that the Buried gets into your head. It's not just, and I assume they all do, right? But the Buried is a little bit more vocal about it seems, with dig. And just the comfort. Why would somebody fall for the Buried? Why would they give in to the Buried? Hezekiah Wakely gives us the greatest example of it. The comfort that comes from the coffin, right? From the under earth, from being submerged, the what's the right word for it? The happiness of being consumed by the whole. I feel like we're getting into a vor aspect here. The joy of being in the hole and the earthen walls growing up around you, and not having to get up and not having to return to what you were doing, but just being able to lay there, finally rest, right? That's the buried, that feeling of being deep underground and knowing that so far down below a single, I said this in the last video, but like a single earthquake or tremor could destroy everything and you'd be trapped down there forever, and yet you're at peace with it, you know? That's the buried. It's easy for me to see that aspect of slothfulness that leads into the buried, but also that peace of there is nothing else of the outside world around here. It's just me and the earth and the quiet. But also, the buried would theoretically give you the ability to bury stuff and control the earth, and earthbending is sick. So yeah, I'm there. And I say theoretically because most of the ways we see the buried used are not that. We see the windstorm and how it gets into the car and then into their throats. And that is not quite the same, but it is still burying them, right? And it is still horrifying. So, you know, if you could suddenly control sandstorms and force them down people's throats, that's a pretty strong power. It's not much I can do to stop a sandstorm. I can get inside, but it's gonna come in through the vents, right? So, kind of cool. This, again, is not one that I would ever go for. I don't mind being underground. Going to caverns and stuff is cool, but I'm not a spelunker, and I don't enjoy the aspect of cave diving, right? I prefer the sky. As we've said, I don't like flying. I hate flying in planes, but I'm not a big underground kind of person. However, I do kind of get it, right? Somebody that prefers to be on the subway and down below the noise of the city above, or somebody that prefers to be in a bunker that they dug out, you know, away from everything else. That I get where they're coming from. Next up is the flesh, and this is a great chance for me to make up for my wrong statements in the previous video about the fears. The flesh is body dysmorphia, not the stranger. Why would somebody ever serve the flesh? Well, maybe they're not happy with how they look. Maybe they're not happy with who they are. Maybe they're not happy with how tall they are, or how short they are, or other physical aspects of their body. Maybe they really like meat. Could easily see a butcher being a avatar of the flesh. But there's also some interesting ones with the flesh for sure, and I think it's partly because we had so many avatars of the flesh and of the stranger that we get to talk about more of the disparate parts of them, because we also have avatars like Angela that deliver people back pieces of their targets, literally take them apart piece by piece. It's pretty horrifying. That's some useful abilities, right? Or again, like with Jared Hopworth, the ability to change things about people or about himself, to be able to pull a bone out of somebody, you know? There's the bone turner, as it were, right? There's a lot of benefits to the flesh, even if I don't really like the idea of it very much. And I understand why somebody would do it. Not going to be me, but I understand why they would. Next up is the slaughter. We have people like Grifter's Bone. Talk about here. Good old Grifter's Bone. The slaughter is a pretty easy one to understand in my mind why somebody would fall to it. They just want to hurt people, or they like the carnage of it, or they don't care what happens to other people, or they have been hurt and they want to hurt others. I think the easy aspect of it is like the Piper with the war of the Piper calls, the sound of the Piper on the battlefield as soldiers are already going to their deaths anyway. It's absolutely terrifying, absolutely horrifying, but it makes sense in a way. The destruction of that entire village because slaughter happened. The misunderstanding, the anger. We see the anger, especially with Melanie. It's understandable, even if I don't like it, right? I think the slaughter is a really interesting one to talk about. And as to what it gives you, it seems like it gives you longevity. It seems like it gives you strength. And more specifically, it gives you the ability to kill people. It gives you the ability to kill a lot of people. We see that with Grifter's Bone. And there are people that would appeal to, right? I'm not one of them, but there are definitely people that would appeal to. So the slaughter makes sense in my mind. But yeah, I'm still with the vast. Next up is the spiral, the distortion, lies itself. Why would someone want to follow the spiral? Maybe they believe in lies. Maybe they prefer lies to the truth. Maybe they lie to themselves and lying is the only thing that keeps them going. I've definitely met some people like that. I think that lies are very powerful in a lot of ways, and I'm somebody that is very against lying. I think the truth is almost always going to be the right way to go, right? However, the spiral has a lot of power. The lies definitely hold great strength over people. We see that with people like Gabriel or even the man upon the stair, right? With that in mind, I think there would be a lot of people that would choose to follow the spiral, that would say, you know, I prefer the pretty lie to the ugly truth. And what it gives you is the ability to shape the world around you, it seems. I mean, with Gabriel, we see that he's able to force calendars to be wrong. And we have people like the Distortion, of course, that is able to control this hotel and doors. And it literally makes the door a lie as to where it goes. Instead, it goes into themselves instead of where it should go. The spiral seems to have a lot more power than I think we got to see from some of the others. And I don't think we got as much about how powerful it really could be. Because if I take that concept to its furthest degree, the very world around you is untrustworthy if an avatar of the spiral's around. That bench you go to sit on could actually be a tree or a dog or a person. You know, anything you have your hands could not be hands at all. They could instead be spaghetti. The spiral seems like very, very powerful, and I think this one is pretty high up there for, like, if I had to pick avatar powers, because again, Gabriel is able to do really crazy stuff. And then, you know, Helen is able to do some pretty weird, crazy stuff as well. So the only thing I wish is that if when you became an avatar of the spiral, you got the laugh, you got Michael's laugh, I'd sign up right away. Next up is the Stranger. And this one, again, I feel like makes a lot of sense. The desire to be someone else or something that wouldn't normally be able to be alive. The desire for it to become alive, like we see with Nikola Orsanov. Or there's even like the anglerfish and the not them and everything going on there. Breaking and hope and the ability to completely supplant other people's lives. This one makes a lot of sense to me, even if it's one of the most terrifying to me normally. The Stranger is, and the idea that it came from something primal that wore us like a suit, as John says, just, but if it gave you the power to wear others like a suit, you know, that would be kind of handy. Incredibly gross and deeply unsettling, but kind of handy. Powers wise, it's got a lot of things going for it, the Stranger. The ability to bring things to life or to supplant others' lives. One of the things the Not Them does, which I'm not saying you would, as an avatar, get the power of the Not Them, but one of the things the Not Them does is completely take over that person's reality. They are that person as far as everybody else is concerned, even though they're not acting fully like them or they don't have all of the memories of who they were or anything like that. They're still are that person as far as everyone else is controlled or concerned. The ability to completely supplant memories. Crazy. And we see with the anatomy students, that they are changing themselves to match the anatomy of people, and as they understand what people should and should not look like. That would be a really powerful power. Shapeshifting, right? The ability to be someone else. Very, very useful. Not one that I want, but very, very useful. I'm still with the Vast right now. Next up, we have the Eye. And other than the Vast, this is the one that would tempt me the most. I am someone who really, really likes to know things. I want to know what conversation people are having when I'm walking by them. I want to know what every book on the shelf says when I pass by it. I want to know how every story ends. I want to know. I want to know all the secrets of the universe, and I can't. And it does bother me. I want to know, and not just do I want to know, I want to see it, I want to understand it, and I want to classify it. I want to put it in a nice little box in my mind that goes into another filing cabinet in my brain, which is then closed up along with the rows of them in my head. So yeah, obviously I would fall to the Eye, and I don't think it's a stretch to think that others would too. The Eye is the desire to know things, to understand them, to see what is not seen. And it gives you those powers, the ability to draw information out of others, the ability to see things you wouldn't normally be able to see, the ability to see things in other rooms and with other people, to see the invisible. The Eye's very, very strong. By the end, we see that it's become so powerful that it's able to watch something that is not to be watched, to know something that is not to be known so much that it wipes that thing from existence. Yeah, I think most of us that listen to the podcast would probably fall to the Eye. So, yeah, probably don't need to focus on that one too much longer. But, second to last, we have the Web. And the Web is the ability to control things, the ability to have a handle on your fate and manipulate fate itself. Again, not a stretch to think that people would jump at this one. The ability to defy your fate or to control other people, the ability to spin a web around them so complete and manipulate them so well that they don't even know they're being manipulated, as we see with people like Annabelle Kane or Raymond Fielding. This one makes perfect sense to me. I understand why people would do it. I think it is not cool. You shouldn't do that to people. You should not manipulate people like that. But I know people, and so I know they do. And, I mean, it gives you some other cool powers, too, like we saw with Neil Ligorio, the puppet that with the spider legs and the ability to literally mannequin yourself, basically, to be able to keep your body moving when it shouldn't. There's some weird stuff you can do with the Web. Annabelle Kane pulling strings from far away and affecting things. There's some weird stuff you can do. The Web definitely would be a draw for a lot of people, and it would give you quite a few abilities for sure. And then lastly, we got to talk about the Extinction again. Even though it never made it to be one of the main 14, it almost did, and that means it's happening. It's coming up in these conversations, and if we get any more, as in my theory for the Magnus Protocol, they're fracturing off, then we'll do like a follow-up video later. So, the Extinction. Why would you serve the Extinction? Well, maybe you think Extinction is a good idea. Look, there's a lot of reasons I could think of people doing it. Bigotry is a big one. I don't think it's a good thing for anyone, but I could unfortunately see people turning to that, right? I also think that the idea of, hey, we've messed it all up, we're just going to wipe the slate clean and start everything over. I could see a scientist or, a megalomaniac thinking that they had the call, they had the right to be able to make that judgment, right? And then what powers would it give you? Well, theoretically, the ability to wipe out everybody, or to wipe out at least a lot of people. That one's pretty self-explanatory, I think, but also horrifying when you think about a person having that ability. Because people are people. They can do great and wonderful and amazing things. They can also really, really mess things up for everybody else. So, that's where we're at with these. How would each of them feed? Well, again, it would be the way that we've seen, right? The corruption would probably feed on corruption itself. corrupting something else, or starting up another hive somewhere, and that would feed them, or consuming people with the insects. That would probably also work. The end would feed on killing people. That pretty clear there. The hunt would feed on hunting. The dark would feed on making things dark, on taking lights out and blinking out areas that were previously very, very well lit, right? Snuffing out the candles. The desolation would feed on burning things. That, yes. The lonely would feed by being alone. The vast would feed much probably in the way that we see Simon Fairchild feed, by throwing people into the vast or into things hiding in the vast. The buried would feed on burying people, as we see with Wakely, or on being underground. The flesh would feed by eating or by twisting or turning. The slaughter would feed by killing people in great droves. Grifter's bone, right? The spiral would feed by lies and lying to people, by deceptions that lead to eventually it getting to feast on people, I would assume. We see that with the actual distortion in the spiral, but I would assume if you're an avatar of the spiral, that's your goal as well, is for the people to eventually have the lies overwhelm them or give in to them, right? Believe the lie. The stranger, well, you feed by becoming someone else, don't you? By delivering something or by taking their place. The eye by seeing, by knowing. The web by controlling, by pulling the right strings, and the fear. Obviously, all of them would be fear as well, right? But it's the fear that these things bring. And then the extinction by wiping out a group of people or a place. Not great, but I could see the extinction getting like a little bit of a feeding off of like wiping out an anthill, you know? Not enough to feed them and keep them fed, but a little snack, I guess. I don't like that idea. We're gonna wrap this up. This has been far less fun than I thought it would be, and more uncomfortable in many ways. So props to the Rusty Quill team for having to go through all of this in their heads, writing all this down. But and probably a lot more than I thought of. But let me know your thoughts on all these. Which one of the entities would you become an avatar for? And what ability would you want if you did? I'm still going with the eye or the vast. I think the eye is probably the big one that I would definitely fall into, but the vast, being able to fly, is pretty great. So let me know your thoughts, and until next time, when hopefully next week we get an episode again, I've been Trey, and this has been The Full Spectrum. Remember to always enjoy the full spectrum that the Magnus archives, the Magnus Protocol, has to offer.